Good evening, everyone. This is Stone Gasman live from New York City. And even though I'm starting my audio commentary tonight at 9 p.m. Good evening, everyone. This is Stone Gasman live from. Okay, I had to get rid of that first. But I'm starting about a half hour early today because I want to read part one of Kurt Vonnegut's book before starting the commentary at 9 p.m. I just read the book for the very first time today. I have never read any Vonnegut book before, and I've been looking forward to doing this. And I wanted to do this primarily because I'd never read the book or had seen the 1972 film adaptation before. And after reading the book and basically falling in love with it on the spot, I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to jump in a half hour early and read part one on air. So we're going to be starting the movie at 9 p.m., the commentary at 9 p.m. But for right now, let me just do something here real quick. Just give me one moment here. At 9 p.m. Eastern. Just to let everybody know with this comment what I'm doing. We'll start commentary at 9 p.m. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and do this. Let's Slaughterhouse-Five, or the Children's Crusade, a duty dance with death. A fourth-generation German-American now living in easy circumstances on Cape Cod and smoking too much, who is an American infantry scout oars to combat as a prisoner of war, witnessed the firebombing of Dresden, Germany, the Florence of the Elbe, a long time ago, and survived to tell the tale. This is a novel somewhat in the telegraphic, schizophrenic manner of tales of the planet Tralfamadore, where the flying saucers come from. Peace. The cattle are lowing, the baby awakes, but the little Lord Jesus, no crying he makes. And this is part one. All this happened, more or less. The war parts, anyway, are pretty much true. One guy I knew really was shot in Dresden for taking a teapot that wasn't his. Another guy I knew really did threaten to have his personal enemies killed by hired gunmen after the war, and so on. I've changed all the names. I really did go back to Dresden with Guggenheim money, God love it, in 1967. It looked a lot like Dayton, Ohio, more open spaces than Dayton has. There must be tons of human bone meal in the ground. I went back there with an old war buddy, Bernard V. O'Hare, and we made friends with a taxi driver who took us to the slaughterhouse where we had locked up at night as prisoner of war. His name was Gerhard Mueller. He told us that he was a prisoner of the Americans for a while. We asked him how it was to live under communism, and he said it was terrible at first because everybody had to work so hard and because there wasn't much shelter or food or clothing. But things were much better now. He had a pleasant little apartment, and his daughter was getting an excellent education. His mother was incinerated in the Dresden firestorm. So it goes. He sent O'Hare a postcard at Christmas time, and here's what it said. I wish you and your family, also to your friend, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and I hope that we'll meet again in a world of peace and freedom in the taxi cab if the accident will. I like that very much, if the accident will. I would hate to tell you what this lousy little book cost me in money and anxiety and time. When I got home from the Second World War 23 years ago, I thought it would be easy for me to write about the destruction of Dresden, since all I would have to do would be to report what I had seen. And I thought, too, that it would be a masterpiece, or at least make me a lot of money, since the subject was so big. But not many words about Dresden came from my mind then, not enough of them to make a book anyway. And not many words come now either, when I have become an old fart with his memories and his Pall Malls with his sons full grown. I think of how useless the Dresden part of my memory has been, and yet how tempting Dresden has been to write about. And I'm reminded of the famous limerick. There was a young man from Stamboul who soliloquized thus to his tool: "You took all my wealth and you ruined my health, and now you won't pee, you old fool." And I'm reminded too of the song that goes, "My name is Jan Janssen. I work in Wisconsin. I work in a lumber mill there. The people I meet when I walk down the street, they say, 'What's your name?' And I say, 'My name is Jan Janssen. I work in Wisconsin,' and so on to infinity." Over the years, I've met often ask me what I am working on, and I usually replied that the main thing was a book about Dresden. I said to Harrison Starr, the movie maker, one time, and he raised his eyebrows and inquired, is it an anti-war book?" "Yes," I said, "I guess." You know what I say to people when I hear they're writing anti-war books? "No, what do you say, Harrison Starr?" I say, "Why don't you read an anti-glacier book instead?" What he meant, of course, was that would always be wars, that were as easy to stop as glaciers. I believe that too. And even if wars didn't keep coming like glaciers, there would still be plain old death. When I was somewhat younger, working on my famous Dresden book, I asked an old war buddy named Bernard V. O'Hare if I could come to see him. He was a district attorney in Pennsylvania. I was a writer on Cape Cod. We had been privates in the war, infantry scouts. We had never expected to make any money after the war, but we were doing quite well. I had the Bell Telephone Company find him for me. They're wonderful that way. I have this disease late at night sometimes involving alcohol and the telephone. I get drunk and I drive my wife away with a breath like mustard gas and roses. And then, speaking gravely and elegantly into the telephone, I ask the telephone operators to connect me with this friend or that one from whom I have not heard in years. I got O'Hare on the line in this way. He is short and I am tall. We were Mutt and Jeff in the war. We were captured together in the war. I told him who I was on the telephone. He had no trouble believing it. He was up. He was reading. Everybody else in his house was asleep. "Listen," I said, "I'm writing this book about Dresden. I like some help remembering stuff. I wonder if I could come down and see you, and we could drink and talk and remember." He was unenthusiastic. He said he couldn't remember much. He told me, though, to come on ahead. "I think the climax of the book will be the execution of poor old Edgar Derby," I said. "The irony is so great. A whole city gets burned down, and thousands of people are killed. And then this one American foot soldier is arrested in the ruins for taking a teapot. And he's given a regular trial, and then he's shot by a firing squad." Said O'Hare, "don't you think that's really where the climax should come?" "I don't know anything about it," he said. "That's your trade, not mine." As a trafficker in climaxes and thrills and characterization and wonderful dialogue and suspense and confrontations, I had outlined the Dresden story many times. The best outline I ever made, or anyway the prettiest one, was on the back of a roll of wallpaper. I used my daughter's crayons, a different color for each main character. One end of the wallpaper was the beginning of the story, and the other end was the end. And then was all that middle part, which was the middle. And the blue line met the red line, and then the yellow line, and the yellow line stopped because the character represented by the yellow line was dead, and so on. The destruction of Dresden was represented by a vertical band of orange cross-hatching, and all the lines that were still alive passed through it, came out on the other side. The end, where all the lines stopped, was a beet field on the Elbe outside of Halle. The rain was coming down. The war in Europe had been over for a couple weeks. We were formed in ranks, with Russian soldiers guarding us, Englishmen, Americans, Dutchmen, Belgians, Frenchmen, Canadians, South Africans, New Zealanders, Australians, thousands of us about to stop being prisoners of war. And on the other side of the field were thousands of Russians and Poles and Yugoslavians, and so on, guarded by American soldiers. An exchange was made there in the rain, 1 for 1. O'Hare and I climbed into the back of an American truck with a lot of others. O'Hare didn't have any souvenirs. Almost everybody else did. I had a ceremonial Luftwaffe saber, still do. The rabid little American I call Paul Lazaro in his book had about a quart of diamonds and emeralds and rubies and so on he had taken from these dead people in the cellars of Dresden. So it goes. An idiotic Englishman who had lost all his teeth somewhere had his souvenir in a canvas bag. The bag was resting on my insteps. He would peek into the bag every now and then, and he would roll his eyes and swivel his scrawny neck, trying to catch people looking covetously at his bag, and he would bounce the bag on my insteps. I thought this bouncing was accidental, but I was mistaken. He had to show somebody what was in the bag, and he had decided he could trust me. He caught my eye, winked, opened the bag. There was a plaster model of the Eiffel Tower in there. It was painted gold. It had a clock in it. That's a smashing thing, he said. And we were flown to a rest camp in France where we were fed chocolate malted milkshakes and other rich foods until we were all covered with baby fat. Then we were sent home, and I married a pretty girl who was covered with baby fat too. And we had babies, and they're all grown up now, and I'm an old fart with his memories and his Pall Malls. My name is Dion Johnson. I work in Wisconsin. I work in a lumber mill there. Sometimes I try to call up old girlfriends on the telephone late at night after my wife has gone to bed. Operator, I wonder if you could give me the number of Mrs. So-and-so. I think she lives at such and such. I'm sorry, sir. There is no such listing. Thanks, operator. Thanks just the same. And I let the dog out, or I let him in, and we talk some. I let him know I like him, and he lets me know he likes me. He doesn't mind the smell of mustard gas and roses. You're all right, Sandy, I'll say to the dog. You know that, Sandy? You're okay. Sometimes I'll turn on the radio and listen to a talk program from Boston or New York. I can't stand recorded music if I've been drinking a good deal. Sooner or later, I go to bed, and my wife asks me what time it is. She always has to know the time. Sometimes I don't know, and I say, search me. I think about my education sometimes. I went to the University of Chicago for a while after the Second World War. I was a student in the Department of Anthropology. At that time, they were teaching that there was absolutely no difference between anybody. They may be teaching that still. Another thing that they taught was that nobody was ridiculous or bad or disgusting. Shortly before my father died, he said to me, you know, you never wrote a story with a villain in it. I told him that was one of the things I learned in college after the war. While I was studying to be an anthropologist, I was also working as a police reporter for the famous Chicago City News Bureau for $28 a week. One time they switched me from the night shift to the day shift, so I worked 16 hours straight. We were supported by all the newspapers in town, and the AP and the UP and all that, and would cover the courts and the police stations and the fire department and the Coast Guard out on Lake Michigan and all that. We were connected to the institutions that supported us by means of pneumatic tubes which ran under the streets of Chicago. Reporters would telephone in stories to writers wearing headphones, and the writers would stencil the stories on mimeograph sheets. The stories were mimeographed and stuffed into the brass and velvet cartridges, which the pneumatic tubes ate. The very toughest reporters and writers were women who had taken over the jobs of men who'd gone to war. And the first story I covered, I had to dictate over the telephone to one of those beastly girls. It was about a young veteran who had taken a job running an old-fashioned elevator in an office building. The elevator door on the first floor was ornamental iron lace. Iron ivy snaked in and out of the holes. There was an iron twig with two iron lovebirds perched upon it. This veteran decided to take his car into the basement, and he closed the door and started down. But his wedding ring was caught in all the ornaments. So he was hoisted into the air, and the floor of the car went down, dropped out from under him, and the top of the car squashed him. So it goes. So I phoned this in, and the woman who was going to cut the stencil asked me, what did his wife say? She doesn't know yet, I said. It just happened. Call her up and get a statement. What? Tell her you're Captain Finn of the police department. Say you have some sad news, give her the news, and see what she says. So I did. She said about what you would expect her to say. There was a baby, and so on. When I get back to the office, the woman writer asked me, just for her own information, what the squash guy had looked when he was squashed. I told her, did it bother you, she said. She was eating a Three Musketeers candy bar. Heck no, Nancy, I said. I've seen lots worse than in the war. Even then, I was supposedly writing a book about Dresden. It wasn't a famous air raid back then in America. Not many Americans knew how much worse it had been than Hiroshima, for instance. I didn't know that either. There hadn't been much publicity, I happened to tell a University of Chicago professor at a cocktail party about the raid, as I had seen it, about the book I would write. He was a member of a thing called the Committee of Social Thought, and he told me about the concentration camps and about how the Germans had made soup and candles out of the fat of dead Jews and so on. All I could say was, I know, I know, I know. The Second World War had certainly made everybody very tough, and I became a public relations man for General Electric in Schenectady, New York, and a volunteer fireman in the village of Alpalos, where I bought my first home. My boss there was one of the toughest guys I ever hoped to meet. He had been a lieutenant colonel in public relations in Baltimore. While I was in Schenectady, he joined the Dutch Reformed Church, which is a very tough church indeed. He used to ask me sneeringly sometimes why I hadn't been an officer, as though I had done something wrong. My wife and I had lost our baby fat. Those were our scrawny years. We had a lot of scrawny veterans and their scrawny wives for friends. The nicest veterans in Schenectady, I thought the kindest and funniest ones, the ones who hated the war the most, were the ones who'd really fought. I wrote the Air Force back then, asking for details about the raid on Dresden, who ordered it, how many planes did it, why they did it, what desirable results there had been, and so on. I was answered by a man who, like myself, was in public relations. He said that he was sorry, that the information was top secret still. I read the letter out loud to my wife, and I said, secret? My God, from whom? We were United World Federalists back then. I don't know what we are now. Telephoners, I guess. We telephone a lot, or I do, anyway, late at night. A couple weeks later, after I telephoned my old war buddy, Bernard V. O'Hare, I really did go to see him. That must have been in 1964 or so, whatever the last year was for the New York's World's Fair. Il fugaces l'aventure Annie. My name is Dion Johnson. There was a young man from Istanbul. I took two little girls with me, my daughter Nanny and her best friend Allison Mitchell. They had never been off Cape Cod before. When we saw a river, we had to stop so they could stand by it and think about it for a while. They'd never seen water in that long and narrow, unsalted form before. The river was the Hudson. There were carp in there, and we saw them. They were as big as atomic submarines. We saw waterfalls, too, streams jumping off cliffs into the valley of the Delaware. There were lots of things to stop and see, and then it was time to go. Always time to go. The little girls were wearing white party dresses and black party shoes, so strangers would know at once how nice they were. Time to go, girls, I'd say, and we would go. And the sun went down, and we had a supper in an Italian place. And then I knocked on the front door of the beautiful stone house of Bernard V. O'Hare. I was carrying a bottle of Irish whiskey like a dinner bell. I met his nice wife, Mary, to whom I dedicate this book. I dedicated to Gerhard Mueller, the Dresden taxi driver, too. Mary O'Hare is a trained nurse, which is a lovely thing for a woman to be. Mary admired the two little girls I brought, mixed them in with her own children, sent them all upstairs to play games and watch television. It was only after the children were gone that I sensed that Mary didn't like me or didn't like something about the night. She was polite, but chilly. It's a nice, cozy house you have here, I said. It really was. I fixed up a place where you can talk and not be bothered. Good, I said, and I imagined two leather chairs near a fire in a paneled room where two old soldiers could drink and talk. But she took us into the kitchen. She had put two straight-back chairs at a kitchen table with a white porcelain top. That tabletop was screaming with reflected light from a 200-watt bulb overhead. Mary had prepared an operating room. She put only one glass on it, which was for me. She explained that O'Hare couldn't drink the hard stuff since the war. So we sat down. O'Hare was embarrassed, but he wouldn't tell me what was wrong. I couldn't imagine what it was about me that could bum up Mary so. I was a family man. I'd been married only once. I wasn't a drunk. I hadn't done her husband any dirt in the war. She fixed herself a Coca-Cola, made a lot of noise banging the ice cube tray in the stainless steel sink, and then she went into another part of the house, but she wouldn't sit still. She was moving all over the house, opening and shutting doors, even moving furniture around to work off anger. I asked O'Hare what I had said or done to make her act that way. It's all right, he said. Don't worry about it. It doesn't have anything to do with you. That was kind of him. He was lying. It had everything to do with me. So we tried to ignore Mary and remember the war. I took a couple of belts of the booze I brought. We would chuckle or grin sometimes as though war stories were coming back, but neither one of us could remember anything good. O'Hare remembered one guy who got into a lot of wine in Dresden before he was bombed, and we had to take him home in a wheelbarrow. It wasn't much to write a book about. I remembered two Russian soldiers who had looted a clock factory. They had a horse-drawn wagon full of clocks. They were happy and drunk. They were smoking huge cigarettes they had rolled in newspaper. That was about it for memories, and Mary was still making noise. She finally came out in the kitchen again for another Coke. She took another tray of ice cubes from the refrigerator, banged it in the sink, even though there was already plenty of ice out. Then she turned to me, let me see how angry she was, and that the anger was for me. She had been talking to herself, so what she said was a fragment of a much larger conversation. You were just babies then, she said. What? I said. You were just babies in the war, like the ones upstairs. I nodded that this was true. We had been foolish virgins in the war, right at the end of childhood. But you're not going to write it that way, are you? This wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I don't know, I said. Well, I know, she said. You'll pretend you were men instead of babies, and you'll be played in the movies by Frank Sinatra and John Wayne, or some of those other glamorous, war-loving, dirty old men. And war will just look wonderful, so we'll have a lot more of them. And they'll be fought by babies like the babies upstairs. So then I understood it was the war that made her so angry. She didn't want her babies or anybody else's babies killed in wars, and she thought wars were partly encouraged by books and movies. So I held up my right hand and I made her a promise. Mary, I don't think this book is ever going to be finished. I must have written 5,000 pages by now and thrown them all away. If I ever do finish it, though, I'll give you my word of honor. There won't be a part for Frank Sinatra or John Wayne. I'll tell you what, I said. I'll call it The Children's Crusade. She was my friend after that. O'Hare and I gave up on remembering, went into the living room, talked about other things. We became curious about the real Children's Crusade, so O'Hare looked it up in a book he had, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds by Charles Mackay, LLD. It was first published in London in 1841. Mackay had a low opinion of all crusades. The Children's Crusade struck him as only slightly more sordid than the 10 Crusades for grown-ups. O'Hare read this handsome passage out loud. History in her solemn page informs us that the Crusaders were but ignorant and savage men, that their motives were those of bigotry unmitigated, and that their pathway was one of blood and wars. Romance, on the other hand, dilates upon their piety and heroism and portrays in her most glowing and impassioned hues their virtue and magnanimity, the imperishable honor they acquired for themselves, and the great services they rendered to Christianity. And then O'Hare read this. Now, what was the grand result of all these struggles? Europe expended millions of her treasures and the blood of 2 million of her people, and a handful of quarrelsome knights retained possession of Palestine for about 100 years. Mackay told us that the Children's Crusade started in 1213, when two monks got the idea of raising armies of children in Germany and France and selling them in North Africa as slaves. 30,000 children volunteered, thinking they were going to Palestine. They were no doubt idle and deserted children who generally swarm in great cities, nurtured on vice and daring, said Mackay, and ready for anything. Pope Innocent III thought they were going to Palestine too, and he was thrilled. These children are awake while we are asleep, he said. Most of the children were shipped out of Marseille, and about half of them drowned in shipwrecks. The other half got to North Africa, where they were sold. Through a misunderstanding, some children reported for duty at Genoa, where no slave ships were waiting. They were fed and sheltered and questioned kindly by good people there, and then given a little money and a lot of advice and sent back home. Hooray for the good people of Genoa, said Mary O'Hare. I slept that night in one of the children's bedrooms. O'Hare had put a book for me on the bedside table. It was Dresden, History, Stage, and Gallery by Mary Endell. It was published in 1908, and its introduction began. It is hoped this little book will make itself useful. It attempts to give an English reading public a bird's eye view of how Dresden came to look as it does, architecturally, of how it expanded musically through the genius of a few men to its present bloom, and it calls attention to certain permanent landmarks in art that make its gallery the resort of those seeking lasting impressions. I read some history further on. Now in 1760, Dresden underwent siege by the Prussians. On the 15th of July began the cannonade. The picture gallery took fire. Many of the paintings had been transported to the Königstein, but some were seriously injured by splinters of bombshells, notably Francia's Baptism of Christ. Furthermore, the stately Kreuzkirche Tower, from which the enemy's movements had been watched day and night, stood in flames. It later succumbed. In sturdy contrast with the pitiful fate of the Kreuzkirche stood the Frankirche, from the curves of whose stone dome the Prussian bombs rebounded like rain. Friedrich was obliged finally to give up the siege because he learned of the fall of Glatz, the critical point of his new conquest. We must be off to Silesia so that we do not lose everything. The devastation of Dresden was boundless. When Goethe, as a young student, visited the city, he still found sad ruins. The two little girls and I crossed the Delaware River, where George Washington had crossed it the next morning. We went to the New York World's Fair, saw what the post had been like, according to the Ford Motor Company and Walt Disney, saw what the future would be like, according to General Motors. And I asked myself about the present, how wide it was, how deep it was, how much was mine to keep. I taught creative writing in the famous Writers' Workshop at the University of Iowa for a couple years after that. I got into some perfectly beautiful trouble, got out of it again. I taught in the afternoons. In the mornings I wrote. I was not to be disturbed. I was working on my famous book about Dresden. And somewhere in there is a nice man named Seymour Lawrence, gave me a 3-book contract, and I said, okay, the first of the 3 will be my famous book about Dresden. The friends of Seymour Lawrence call him Sam, and I say to Sam now, Sam's here, the book. It is so short and jumbled and jangled, Sam, because there is nothing intelligent to say about a massacre. Everybody is supposed to be dead, to never say anything or want anything ever again. Everything is supposed to be very quiet after a massacre, and it always is, except for the birds. And what do the birds say? All there is to say about the massacre, things like pooty wheat. I have told my sons that they are not under any circumstances to take part in massacres, and that the news of massacres of enemies is not to fill them with satisfaction or glee. I have also told them not to work for companies which make massacre machinery, and to express contempt for people who think we need machinery like that. As I've said, I recently went back to Dresden with my friend O'Hare. We had a million laughs in Hamburg and West Berlin and East Berlin and Vienna and Salzburg and Helsinki and in Leningrad too. It was very good for me because I saw a lot of authentic backgrounds for made-up stories, which I will write later on. One of them will be Russian Baroque, and another will be No Kissing, and another will be Dollar Bar, and another one will be If the Accident Will, and so on, and so on. There was a Lufthansa plane that was supposed to fly from Philadelphia to Boston to Frankfurt. O'Hare was supposed to get on in Philadelphia, and I was supposed to get on in Boston, and off we go. But Boston was socked in, so the plane flew straight to Frankfurt from Philadelphia. And I became a non-person in the Boston fog, and Lufthansa put me in a limousine with some other non-persons and sent us to a motel for non-night. The time would not pass. Somebody was playing with the clocks, and not only with the electric clocks, but the wind-up kind too. The second hand on my watch would twitch once, and a year would pass, and then it would twitch again. There was nothing I could do about it. And as an earthling, I had to believe whatever clocks said and calendars. I had 2 books with me, which I meant to read on the plane. One was Words for the Wind by Theodore Rothke, and this is what I found in there. I wake to steep and take my waking slow. I feed my late in what I cannot fear. I learn by going where I have to go. My other book was Erika Ostrovsky's Céline and His Vision. Céline was a brave French soldier in the First World War until his skull was cracked. After that, he couldn't sleep, and there were noises in his head. He became a doctor, he treated poor people in the daytime, and he wrote grotesque novels all night. No art is possible without a dance with death, he wrote. The truth is death, he wrote. I fought nicely against it as long as I could, danced with it, festooned it, waltzed it around, decorated it with streamers, titillated it. Time obsessed him. Miss Ostrovsky reminded me of the amazing scene in Death on the Installment Plan, where Saline wants to stop the bustling of a street crowd. He screams on paper, make them stop. Don't let them move anymore at all. There, make them freeze once and for all, so that they won't disappear anymore. I looked through the Gideon Bible in my motel room for tales of great destruction. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar, I read. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah, brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. So it goes. Those were vile people in both those cities, as is well known. The world was better off without them. And Lot's wife, of course, was told not to look back where all those people and their homes had been. But she did look back. And I love her for that because it was so human. She was turned into a pillar of salt. So it goes. People aren't supposed to look back. I'm certainly not going to do it anymore. I finished my war book now. The next one I write is going to be fun. This one is a failure and had to be since it was written by a pillar of salt. It begins like this. Listen, Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time. It ends like this. Pootie wheat. And that is part one of Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. Now, and I wanted to read that as preparation for this, because like I said, I've never read Vonnegut before. I remember in high school, somebody actually wrote in my yearbook to read Cat's Cradle. And to be honest, the only experience I've ever had with Kurt Vonnegut is his cameo in Back to School, which I'll talk about later in the commentary. But I was so taken aback at this book, and I do plan on reading it again. I do plan on reading more of Kurt Vonnegut's work, and also I am looking forward to reading more. Watching more film adaptations of Vonnegut's work. I just saw Slaughterhouse-Five for the first time today. I'm eager to start talking about it in just a minute here. And I look forward to watching other adaptations of his work like Mother Night, which was written and directed by Keith Gordon and starring Nick Nolte. Unfortunately, a lot of Vonnegut's adaptations to the screen haven't really made a lot of money, and Slaughterhouse-Five is no exception. It was directed by George Roy Hill, the great director behind Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and later on he won the Oscar for directing Sting. And it stars Michael Sachs, a complete unknown, as Billy Pilgrim, which I think was the right call on George Roy Hill's part, as well as Ron Leibman and Valerie Perrine. So I have Slaughterhouse-Five pretty much ready to go here. Anybody out in the comments, please say hi. Please let your know of your presence. Anything you want to talk about in terms of Vonnegut or Slaughterhouse-Five, please go ahead and share it. I will go ahead and share it on the screen. But we should go ahead and get started here. Let me just go into here real quick, and we are going to start at the Universal logo. I am watching this on Amazon Prime, by the way, although it is available on an Arrow Blu-ray, which came out a couple years ago. I'll talk about that later in the commentary as well. But if everybody's ready, I got it paused at the Universal logo. Turn down the volume, and I will give everybody just another 10, 15 seconds here. But like I said, I'm paused at the Universal logo for Slaughterhouse-Five. Really looking forward to talking about this because there's a lot to talk about with this movie. I mean, there was a lot to unpack here today as far as preparing for this commentary, and I'm really, really looking forward to watching this movie with all of you. So without further ado, we will start on the count of 3. 3, 2, 1, and play. And we are starting Slaughterhouse-Five. released by Universal Pictures on March 15th, 1972. Hey, Rob, how you doing tonight? Glad you could join us. Really excited about this. A Universal picture, absolutely. And like I said, this movie, unfortunately, it made no money. I mean, Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid was the #1 film of 1969, which was the same year that Vonnegut's book Slaughterhouse-Five came out in. And this opening scene right here, we have a car rushing up to a giant house, which when we pull away, when the camera pulls away, we realize, oh, wow, this is a huge, huge house. And these are actually Billy Pilgrim's children. Now, for those of you who have not read Slaughterhouse-Five, I'll give you a brief synopsis here. Basically, Billy Pilgrim is a stand-in or a conduit for Kurt Vonnegut himself. For 20 years, he wanted to write a book about the devastating bombing of Dresden in Germany, which took place in February of 1945. And it was absolutely devastating. Now, and even though in that first part of the book that I just read, they were saying that he was saying that there was actually more casualties than Hiroshima, the bombing of Hiroshima. Well, actually, that has been more or less debunked since then. The estimates now range to about 25,000. I mean, a lot of people thought it was between maybe, even 100,000, maybe up to 500,000. Well, no, I mean, the death toll was about 25,000, which is still devastating, of course. But, and here we have our protagonist, Billy Pilgrim, who is, at this point, I think this is in the mid-70s, roughly. In the book, it says that he dies in 1976 and was born in 1922. So he would have been 54 when he died. And he's writing a letter saying that he's unstuck in time. Evidently, he has the ability to jump back and forth at different time periods. Now, this is a very unusual time travel story. This is not like Back to the Future or Somewhere in Time or any other time travel stories that we're probably used to. Because the idea behind Slaughterhouse-Five is that Vonnegut, who actually served in World War II and was actually at the bombing of Dresden, he'd been wanting to write a book about the bombing for 20 years. And eventually he decided to put all his experiences into this one book. This is actually his 6th book, by the way, because he also wrote Cat's Cradle and the other books before that. A George Roy Hill, Paul Monash production of Slaughterhouse-Five. And this is Billy Pilgrim, who is a chaplain's assistant, and he's running in the snow here. Michael Sachs, of course, is the star of Slaughterhouse-Five, and he was a complete unknown, still is a complete unknown. And what's interesting about Michael Sachs is he was really only in 9 films in his career, with Slaughterhouse-Five being his very first film. The other films that he did, just one second. I hate it when I don't have everything ready to go in terms of what I should have up and what I don't should have up. But there was a lot I had to research for this commentary, so bear with me here. Michael Sachs was only in 9 films, with Slaughterhouse-Five being the first one. But he was also in Steven Spielberg's Sugarland Express as Officer Maxwell Slide, and that was the movie that Spielberg made before Jaws. He was also in The Private Files of J. Edgar Hoover, Hanover Street, which was written and directed by Peter Hyams in 1979 with Harrison Ford. He played Jeff in the Amityville Horror in 1979. Split Image, 1982. I found that actually very interesting because Split Image is a forgotten film directed by Ted Kotcheff, starring Michael O'Keefe and Karen Allen, but it also has James Woods and Peter Fonda and Brian Dennehy. Quite a cast for a very unknown film. And then finally, he was also in Starflight, The Plane That Couldn't Land. And his last film was in 1984 called The House of God, where he played Wayne Potts. And that's basically all he did. And according to Wikipedia, after spending time working in technology positions on Wall Street, Sachs in 2004 joined the online bond trading company Market Access as head of global applications development. He was employed by Morgan Stanley from 1994 to 2004 as executive director, global head of bond technology for the fixed income division. Other assignments at Morgan Stanley included chief operating officer for fixed income technology and global head of technology for the foreign exchange division. Prior to Morgan Stanley, he had held positions at Salomon Brothers Incorporated and IBM Research Division. So Michael Sachs, he didn't do a lot of films, and this is, of course, the exquisite Valerie Perrine, who we will talk about much later in the commentary. We'll definitely have a lot to talk about Valerie. But for the time being, we need to establish who Billy Pilgrim is and the fact that he's become unstuck in time and that he's able to just jump, at different points all throughout his life without warning and without, the edits in this movie are very, very quick. They're super quick. And as you can see, he keeps going back to World War II here. And a lot of people have interpreted Slaughterhouse-Five, Vonnegut's book, as his way of finally spilling all the horrors that he experienced at the bombing of Dresden into this one singular work, this anti-war novel that he wrote. But he also added in a lot of black comedy, which really, I think, adds greatly to the novel in terms of, here again, not explaining in details the utter carnage and devastation of what happened at Dresden by just, sprinkling in some humor to, liven things up a bit. And George Roy Hill and the screenwriter, who, by the way, the name of the gentleman who adapted Slaughterhouse-Five, his name is Stephen Geller. And he's a novelist himself. He attended Dartmouth and Yale University. And he actually wrote the same year as Slaughterhouse-Five. He also co-wrote the Valachi Papers, which was a gangster film starring Charles Bronson, as well as Ashanti in 1979. And he's also written books on screenwriting. He's written plays. He's directed both theater and he currently teaches Shakespeare, satire, and the personal essay at Savannah College of Art and Design. And his most recent novel is Jews in Dark Matter. And his most recent nonfiction book is Sabbath on Swath, an authorized autobiography. And if you want to learn any more about Stephen Geller, who's now in his early 80s, you can go to uprightonthedownbeat.com. Now, the gentleman lying on the snow here across from Billy Pilgrim, this is in fact Paul Lazaro, the character in the book Paul Lazaro, who becomes the antagonist to Billy Pilgrim because of the other gentleman that they're with, who is Roland Weary. What's life going to be like without a pecker? See, that's the perfect example of the dark humor that Vonnegut put in here. And like I said, pretty much everything in this movie is taken from the book. I mean, the only thing I don't remember the dog Spot being in there. Maybe I just rushed through it a little too much, but there's a lovely shot of Valerie right there. Time travel's a bitch. Yes, indeed. But Paul Lazaro is played by actor Ron Leibman. And not a very big name, but at the same time, he did a lot of films. I mean, Before Slaughterhouse-Five, he had done his film debut in Where's Papa, and he was also in The Hot Rock. And then he was later on in Norma Ray. He played Ruben in that. He played the villain in Zorro the Gay Blade, which I'm not really a fan of, to be honest. But he was nominated for a Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Supporting Actor in a movie I have a soft spot for, which is Rhinestone. And it's about Dolly Parton is going to turn Sylvester Stallone, a New York City cab driver, into a country western singer. And Rob Leibman plays Dolly Parton's manager, who basically all he wants to do is sleep with her. And so they make this deal where if Dolly Parton is unsuccessful in turning Sylvester Stallone into a country music singer, then she's going to have to sleep with him. So, but he also did some other very good movies. He was also in Night Falls on Manhattan, a very underrated and underseen Sidney Lumet movie from '96. And he was also in Garden State in 2004, where he played Dr. Cohen as well as Autofocus. So he did his fair share of movies. He was also in several things for television. And sadly, he passed away at the age of 82 on December 6, 2019. And so it goes. All right, now the actress here, now this is going to get even more weird here, because the actress here playing Billy Pilgrim's wife, her name is Sharon Gans. Now, Sharon Gans, in case you don't know who this is, she had done a couple of movies, but Slaughterhouse-Five was really the only one of any real note. She also starred in a documentary called Artists and Orphans, a true drama, and she won an Obie Award for Best Actress for her performance in Soon Jack November. However, she's actually known for more notorious reasons, because basically in July of 2019, and this is when she was still alive, by the way, East magazine published an article by Spencer Schneider in which he describes the school that Sharon Gans ran as an ultra-secret organization which engaged in various forms of physical and emotional abuse on its members, including himself, such as forced adoption, arranged marriages, public humiliation, and forced labor. Mr. Schneider's book, A Manhattan Cult Story, will be published next year on July 5th, 2022. On November 12th, 2019, the New York Post published an expose on Sharon Gans and school. The article quotes former members who came forward to recount, among other things, surreptitiously being recruited, mental abuse, arranged marriages, hard labor, and sleep deprivation. She died on January 22nd, 2021 at her home at the Plaza Hotel. And so it goes. Following her death, a class action was filed against her estate and several others in New York Supreme Court, claiming, among other things, that the plaintiffs were duped into becoming unpaid servants. So, unfortunately, yeah, she doesn't have a very high reputation now, and I think we'll leave it at that. I mean, we'll see her a couple more points in the movie, but we'll just leave it at that right now and not talk about her anymore. So here's Billy Pilgrim as he is captured by the Germans. It's really weird. I mean, very rarely in the book does Vonnegut use the word Nazi. He mostly refers to them as just Germans. And of course, him and Edgar Derby and Roland Weary and Paul Lazaro are all part of this group. But then, as you could say, without warning, we jump ahead into the future again, where, you know, he's either at a Lions Club meeting or he's, you know, with his family, you know, different points. Ugh, there you go. But we get the idea by now, 15 minutes in, that he just, you know, without warning, he just jumps at various points in time. Okay, now I really want to talk about this guy right here, this captain right here with the mustache. This is actor Robert Blossom, and his character name in the book and in this movie is Wild Bob Cody. And he's remembered. I mean, he's primarily a character actor, but he's been in a lot of big films. I mean, most young audiences are sure to remember him as Old Man Marley from Home Alone. At that point, he had a large beard then. He was really good in that. But I also loved him in Doc Hollywood, where Michael J. Fox plays a surgeon that's driving out to Los Angeles to get into plastic surgery and make a lot of money and meet a lot of women. And he crashes his car into Judge Evans' fence. And Robert Blossom plays the judge who sentences him to medical care and treatment in the small town in the South, the squash capital of the South. And his last film was The Quick and the Dead in 1995, directed by Sam Raimi. However, he was also in Arthur Hiller's The Hospital, The Great Gatsby from 1974. He played a farmer in Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Escape from Alcatraz. He was in Christine, John Carpenter's Christine, with Keith Gordon, who I mentioned earlier, that directed Mother Night. He was also in Last Temptation of Christ and Always, the Steven Spielberg remake. And there is actually a documentary that was put out about him called Full Blossom, The Life of Poet and Actor Robert Blossom. And he passed away at age 87 in 2011. And so it goes. And okay, one bizarre thing about this adaptation, which a lot of critics noted at the time, and what I'm sure you realize by now, in the book, Vonnegut, whenever he mentions somebody dying, he always says, "and so it goes." In the movie, and I've been trying to figure out the rationale behind this, but Stephen Geller never uses those words. Even when we see somebody die on screen, we never hear anybody utter those words. Now, the gentleman in the bed right here, he's actually the production designer. His name is Henry Bubstead, and he was a very, very prolific art director and production designer who worked at Universal. He won an Oscar for To Kill a Mockingbird, and he also won for The Sting, for George Roy Hill's The Sting. And he also worked on Alfred Hitchcock films like Vertigo. He worked on Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. Very, very long and distinguished career. I mean, he has over 200 credits to his name. He actually appeared on screen here in Slaughterhouse-Five. But like I said, he had been working ever since the mid-40s, 1944 to be exact. And, he had done so many wonderful films. I mean, he also even worked as a production designer on Psycho 3 and also Funny Farm, which starring Chevy Chase, which happened to be the last film effort for director George Roy Hill. And just real quick, we might as well talk about Mr. Hill for a little bit. Now, I don't know why George Roy Hill is not more well-known or celebrated when it comes to directing films, because he didn't make a lot. I mean, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Only made 15 films. However, what's interesting about many of those films is that a lot of them got Oscar nominations, a lot of them got Golden Globe nominations, and many other awards. Like, for example, in 1966, he did the movie Hawaii, based on the James Michener novel starring Julie Andrews. And in 1967, he did Thoroughly Modern Millie. And then in 1969, he exploded with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the #1 film of the year. And then he decided to follow up with this version of Slaughterhouse-Five. And then after that, he made The Sting, which got 10 Oscar nominations, 7 wins, and he won for Best Director. After that, he did The Great Waldo Pepper. He did the great hockey comedy Slapshot with Paul Newman. And look, whatever your feelings are on hockey, you have to see Slapshot. That is one of the funniest movies of the 1970s. He also did A Little Romance, The World According to Garp, which was a great adaptation of the novel by John Irving. A little-known movie called The Little Drummer Girl, starring Diane Keaton, based on the novel by John le Carre. And finally, of course, he did Funny Farm in 1988, starring Chevy Chase. And I'm going to take a break real quick to say hi to everybody in the chat. Yeah, Cliff, I haven't seen this one. I wanted to see it, but it wasn't available on any of my services. Still looking forward to tonight's commentary. It is on Amazon Prime. That's how I'm watching it, is on Amazon Prime. I was debating buying the Arrow Blu-ray, but obviously I didn't know if I was going to like this movie, because this really was a first-time viewing for me. Dan Shine, great to see you in the chat as well. I believe it's a Bronson multi-movie Blu-ray. Yes, the Valachi Papers. Yeah, that's on. The Valachi Papers is on Amazon Prime as well. The Hot Rock is a good movie. I've never seen it, to be honest, but I'll probably do a commentary for that later this year. Great and Deranged. All right. Now, so yeah, that was Henry Bumstead in the bed right there. And so we're back with World War II. And the World War II sequences in many ways serve as a juncture point, that because he wanted to make the Dresden bombing the center, the core of this book. It's what inspired him to write the book, Vonnegut, and it's what he wanted to emphasize about his anti-war sentiment and all that stuff. But it's funny, as I mentioned before today, I really only knew Kurt Vonnegut from the 1986 comedy Back to School, starring Rodney Dangerfield. And there's a hilarious part in that movie where basically Rodney Dangerfield plays a rich entrepreneur of tall and fat stores. He owns a bunch of tall and fat stores at this large chain of retail stores around the country. And his son, played by Keith Gordon. Yes, we're talking about Keith Gordon a lot too here in this commentary. He plays Rodney Dangerfield's son, and he's having difficulty in college. He's struggling to, he's like the towel boy on the diving team, and he's struggling with his studies and with women and everything like that. So Rodney Dangerfield's character, who had never attended college, decided he's going to enroll in the same college to help his student son. And he does that by basically buying a building, a business for students to do, instead of actually putting in SAT scores or anything like that. Ned Beatty is the head of the college who lets Rodney Dangerfield in. But of course, when he gets in, he doesn't really do any actual work. He actually just, okay, just real quick, there's the death of Robert Blossom's character that we were talking about before. His name was Wild Bob Cody, and so it goes. But going back to school, so Rodney Dangerfield needs to write a paper on Kurt Vonnegut. Sally Kellerman, who we just lost as well, and so it goes, she plays his English professor. And so, he says he tried to read Vonnegut's books. He couldn't get into them. So he basically hires Kurt Vonnegut himself to write the paper for him. He just reaches out to Kurt Vonnegut to do it. And there's this hilarious moment in Back to School when Keith Gordon, his son, goes to the door after he asks him, so how are you going to write the paper? And he opens the door, and it's Kurt Vonnegut. And he just takes off his hat and says, hi, I'm Kurt Vonnegut. I'm here to speak to Thornton Mellon. And, of course, his son, Keith Gordon, is just like jaw dropped, like, okay, Dad? Kurt Vonnegut is here to see you. And what's interesting is that I'm sure, given Vonnegut's sense of humor, I'm sure he read that script and laughed his ass off because, interestingly enough, even though they don't name drop Vonnegut, there's an earlier scene in Back to School with comedian Sam Kinison. And he's challenging the students to talk about Vietnam and why we pulled our troops out of Vietnam. Well, of course, Vietnam was, at its height in the 70s. And, this is obviously what also burned Vonnegut's passion in terms of, getting out there what he experienced at Dresden and how he thinks that, books and movies are basically just propaganda to lead us into war. But the difference between Vietnam and World War II was that when the soldiers returned from World War II, they were heralded as heroes. They were, everybody loved them. Everybody praised them. And Vonnegut was rather disillusioned by all that because he felt that, well, we still murdered 25,000 people in Dresden. I kind of saw all this stuff firsthand, and he didn't really feel like a hero. I mean, and just something personal with me. My grandfather, he took 5 bullets on D-Day. He was actually at Normandy Beach when he took 5 bullets. And like many other veterans, he never, ever, ever talked about his experiences. And I remember that this is really depressing, but I remember visiting him in a VA hospital when he was about to die in 1990. And all I remember him saying was that, he just said, I just want to lay here and die. That's all he said to me. That's all he said to me. Like that was it. And I distinctly remember my father being over in a corner and just looking at the ground. And of course, years later, I fully understood what exactly, many of these soldiers, our grandfathers, went through in World War II. And I mean, like I said, my favorite movie of all time is The Best Years of Our Lives, which is about 3 veterans returning home from World War II and they have to readjust to civilian life. Absolute masterpiece. But in the 1960s, we had a different kind of war. Now, in 1959, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who my grandfather on my mother's side actually personally worked with, he warned the American people before leaving office, watch out for the military-industrial complex. And basically 3 years later, of course, Kennedy was president and he was assassinated. And I've always held the theory, no matter how many movies are made, no matter how many books are written, that powerful people wanted the Vietnam War to happen. So I honestly believe that high-ranking government officials, whether they hired somebody or not, they murdered John F. Kennedy. And then when Lyndon Baines Johnson became president, the very first meeting that he called was over Vietnam. And of course, as we know now, thanks to Robert S. McNamara in the Academy Award-winning documentary, The Fog of War, the Gulf of Tonkin incident that got us into the Vietnam War, it never happened. The Gulf of Tonkin incident never took place. So 58,000 of our generation in Vietnam were killed, as well as 1 million Vietnamese were all killed based upon a fucking lie. And it just proves that we will lie to go to war. The military-industrial complex wanted to make money off of Vietnam. That's why they didn't want the war to end. I mean, we just got off a 20-year war with Iraq and Afghanistan, which was really all over oil. The military-industrial complex, the defense contractors, money, money, money. Give us money, money, money. They don't, and of course, the soldiers and sailors became nothing but expendable pawns. Get back on the battlefield and die so we can make money. You want to say that's a controversial stance? I don't. To me, that is what perception being reality. That's how I look at it. And of course, I mean, what's going on in the Ukraine right now? Of course, the American government is now pounding the drums again. War, 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 and it's like just and of course with Vonnegut, that what his whole theme with this movie was that war is useless. This is what the aliens that take Billy Pilgrim. Their whole thing is that war is there's no purpose to it. It's completely stupid and pointless. And just take a few step backs to look at us as a species and as a human race and really question what exactly we're doing. And here again, that anti-war sentiment is drenched. I mean, that anti-war sentiment is just drenched in the book, and it's very, very obvious that Kurt Vonnegut, he was going through PTSD experiences like Billy Pilgrim. That he wanted to get all of this out in a unique and creative way, so that people would talk about it. And we're still talking about Slaughterhouse-Five 50 years later, more so the book than the movie. But at the same time, it's still one of the most important works in literature. And of course, it's been banned, it's been challenged, and dare I say it, burned. I mean, there was a book burning in Tennessee just last month. I mean, we have book burnings going on now in America, and it's disgusting. It's terrible. Just because, Christian ideology doesn't want people reading these books with sex and violence, even though they probably haven't read the books themselves, which is, of course, hilarious. But anyway, let's get back to the movie here. So Billy Pilgrim, and there's his dog Spot. And like I said, I mean, this Slaughterhouse-Five is all about dealing with traumatic war experiences, the horrors of war, but at the same time with a nice with drops of just delicious humor. And okay, here we go. Where look, we have a giant blue ball coming in from the sky, and his dog Spot sees it. Like, what is going on here? And I like the fact that the screenwriter was able to do this about 30 minutes in, making this the exciting part of the book. So, because this is essentially the exciting incident in a movie where the protagonist, goes even above and beyond what he does in the first act of the story. But the idea is that these aliens whisk him off away to this planet about who knows? I mean, billions of light years away. I mean, Vonnegut supplies like exact numbers in the book, which are kind of irrelevant. But at the same time, I mean, because the idea is that Earth cannot see this planet and the planet cannot see Earth, and all that. Yes, Cliff. Just to let you know, it is on Prime, and I will give a timestamp here real quick. We are at approximately 34 minutes in. So if you want to jump to the 34-minute mark, that's where we are, and we can continue from there. But actually, let me go ahead and just get out of the way real quick. The Blu-ray. There is, in fact, a Blu-ray that came out just a couple years ago. Let me just bring it up here. It came out in December of 2019 by Arrow Video. And it's got very high marks from Blu-ray.com, the video quality, the audio quality, 4.5 out of 5. And it has a number of extras, believe it or not. There's an audio commentary by Troy Howarth, which offers Howarth perhaps a bit out of his element, as he mentioned early on. Yeah. I don't know what that is, but never mind that. There's a analysis from there's an analysis called "And So It Goes," which somebody manages to compare Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid to Jules and Jim, while kind of jokingly mentioning there's probably not going to be any George Roy Hill as an auteur movement anytime soon on the horizon. Oh, we're getting heavy rain here. I apologize for that. Yeah, we're getting heavy rain here up in New York. Pilgrim's Process is an interview with actor Perry King, who plays who plays Pilgrim's son, and I'll point him out when we get to him. Only on Earth, presenting Slaughterhouse-Five, is a really interesting interview with Rocky Lang, the son of producer Jennings Lang, who discusses his father's career before, during, and after the production of the movie. He mentions that it seems obvious Universal didn't quite know how to market a story of time-traveling alien abductee named Pilgrim. There's also Unstuck in Time, documenting Slaughterhouse-Five, another interesting interview with behind-the-scenes filmmaker Robert Crawford Jr., discussing his efforts on the marketing side of things after having done similar duty on Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. Currently contain Slaughterhouse-Five, which features film music historian Noel Schweiger, discussing the film's interesting Gould performances of classical war horses. We'll talk about Glenn Gould a little bit later. And finally, there's a theatrical trailer and a reversible featuring original and newly commissioned artwork by Corey Brickley. So, and you can, I mean, this Arrow video Blu-ray is still very much available. It costs $28. But considering all the extras and the top video and audio quality, that's about on par right now for Blu-ray. So if you're interested, that's available. Go pick it up. Absolutely. But I mean, this is also a perfect example where I think people would benefit more from reading the book first than actually watching the movie. I'm really weird because when it comes to classic literature, I have a rule. When it comes to classic literature, I always read the book first. I mean, perfect example. I've never watched any film version of Les Miserables because I've never read the book. I probably will read the book at some point. Whether I'm going to like it or not, we'll see about that. But I did want to read Vonnegut's book before I saw the movie, and I'm very happy that I did. Very happy. Okay, now this actor here on the right, that of course is Edgar Derby, played by Eugene Roche, who was known as the Ajax Man in 1970s television commercials. However, he did lots of other films too. I mean, he was in, well, actually, he did mostly television work. I mean, he was in like Kojak, Streets of San Francisco, Taxi, Magnum PI, but he also did movies like Foul Play, Corvette Summer. Yeah, and he was also even in Batman the Animated Series, and movies like When a Man Loves a Woman, Executive Decision. Yeah, he had a pretty long career as well. And as you remember, when I read the first part of the book in my introduction to this commentary, he's really the character that Vonnegut uses as the climax of the film, which we'll get to later, where I told the story about him stealing the teapot, and of course the Germans actually murdering him just because of that. Yeah, you know, I'm not going to comment on what she says in his ear, but yeah, I'm gonna, yeah. I mean, just because you bought me a diamond, I'm gonna, look fabulous for you and lose all this weight and like, no, just no comment, and no comment whatsoever. I'm not going to comment on that. But it is kind of funny. I mean, here again, there's moments all throughout this movie, and of course in the book that are, that are very darkly humorous. And Vonnegut really had a unique sense of humor to balance out all this grim wartime footage and everything. Yeah, this is their anniversary, and I believe this is the moment where I think is it coming up here. Yes. Okay. Yeah. He's going up the stairs here, and he's going to the bathroom. And in the bathroom is, in fact, his son, Robert Pilgrim, played by Perry King. Now, Perry King, uh, he, uh, he is still with us. This was his very first movie, but he was also in The Lords of Flatbush, Mandingo, Andy Warhol's Bad. But the movie that I know him from is Class of 1984, which was a revenge picture written by Tom Holland and directed by Mark Lester in 1982. And he's actually the star of the movie. He plays a piano teacher that comes to this really rough high school. Okay, actually, pause one thing on the Class of 1984. This, of course, is a Playboy spread of Valerie Perrine. Now, Valerie Perrine had actually posed for Playboy in May of 1972, only a month, literally, after this movie came out. And here again, this was her very first movie. I don't think that that is the actual Playboy layout. I'm pretty sure that was done specifically for this movie because the movie came out before the pictorial. But it's pretty clear because of this movie that she started being seen by more people, and obviously Playboy reached out to her and said, "Hey, we'd like to make you the centerfold," and she posed for Playboy magazine. Or actually, forgive me. Let me double check that because I know she posed in 1981 as well, but I'm not. I need to double check if it was. Okay, yeah, she did a pictorial layout in May 1972 issue of Playboy, later appearing on the cover in August of 1981, and that was right after Superman 2 came out. Remember that she played Eve Teschmacher in the Superman films. But anyway, we'll talk more about Valerie later, I promise. But going back to Perry King real quick of Class of 1984 is the movie that I know him the best from, where he plays this piano teacher. He comes to this really violent high school, this horribly violent high school where, there's a lot of drug dealing. There's this gang that seems to run the school, and they do a prostitution business always every day after school. Roddy McDowell plays a teacher who keeps the gun in his briefcase, because of that. And basically what the gang does is that they go after Perry King's family. They do horrible things, like they rape his wife and everything. And eventually Perry King has to basically grow a set and take revenge. And he actually murders all these gang members at the end of Class of 1984, including a very memorable moment where he puts one through a buzzsaw in the shop. I mean, it's a guilty pleasure of mine. I had a lot of fun watching Class of 1984, but it's certainly not for everyone. And of course, critics have noted that, well, this movie is rather prescient in terms of, school violence and everything. And, and I think the director has kind of taken a little bit too much credit for that. But at the same time, look, as a revenge picture, it's actually kind of fun. Excuse me one moment. So they decided to vote. This is the scene where they vote on. Well, okay, we passed it, but Edgar Derby is going to be the one that's going to be communicating with the Germans while they are prisoners of war. Now, here we have another scene where, as we can see, Valerie in this movie plays an adult film star. In the book, I love the. I love what the Vonnegut says in the book, that she's a star of blue movies, as they used to be called back in the day. Of course, 1972 was the year that Deep Throat came out and became one of the. I mean, like, it made like $600 million. I mean, it was insane. Of course, all that money was made by by the mafia. But after Midnight Cowboy, which was the best picture of 1969, sex came out of the closet. It became, it was on, movie screens, adult material started. I can't see Slaughterhouse-Five being filmed in the mid 1960s. I just cannot see it. They were lucky, I mean, especially after the rating system came out, that they were able to get away with transferring, Vonnegut's, the sex and the language and the violence. They were able to put that in this movie, which, of course, made it a lot more faithful to the book. But yeah, in this movie, Valerie, of course, makes her film debut as a adult film actress, who, of course, Billy Pilgrim kind of, falls in lust with after looking at the Playboy magazine that we saw earlier that his son, Perry King, had in the bathroom. Hey, Katrina, glad you could join us. Glad to see you on here. Yeah, and Dying Breed, yeah, welcome to the commentary as well. Let me give a timestamp real quick. We're approximately 46 minutes in. We're just after 46 minutes in, and here his son, Robert Pilgrim, played by Perry King, is obviously arrested. He had gotten into some trouble, and eventually we'll see him. He becomes a Green Beret. Later on in the film, we'll see him in his military uniform and everything. But yeah, I like Perry King with the long hair here. That's pretty cool. Now, the other Billy Pilgrim's other child, who we saw at the very, very beginning when she and Perry King ran up to the house, she's played by Holly Near. Now, we're going to see her in several scenes near the end, but I wanted to bring her up real quick because her professional career began in 1969 with the Mod Squad, and she was also in shows like Room 2222, All in the Family, and The Partridge Family. However, what I discovered her in, I'm sorry, yeah, in 1970, Near was a cast member of the Broadway musical Hair, and then following the Kent State shootings in May of that year, which of course was, a retaliation against the Vietnam War, the entire cast of Hair staged a silent vigil in protest, and the song "It Could Have Been Me," released on a live album, was her response to the shootings. And in 1971, she joined the FTA, the Free the Army Tour, an anti-Vietnam roadshow of music, comedy, and plays that performed for soldiers, many of whom who were resisting the war and racism from within the military. So she was, very much an anti-war activist, and as well as a feminist. And just last year, this is a cinematic treasure right here. Just last year, the movie FTA, which came out in 1972, came out on Blu-ray for the very first time. It was completely restored in 4K. And basically, it had Donald Sutherland and Jane Fonda on the FTA tour, Holly Near being the youngest member. And basically in 1971, at the height of the Vietnam War, Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland toured an anti-war comedy show across Southeast Asia, despite being highly controversial. It was a huge success among stationed soldiers. Out of circulation and difficult to see for decades, FTA has now been fully restored by Indie Collect in 4K, and this Blu-ray includes a introduction with Jane Fonda and an interview, as well as a full-length documentary called Sir No Sir by David Ziegler, who also took part in the restoration. And this was directed by Francine Parker, and I was blown away by this. Now, of course, because of Jane Fonda's Hanoi Hilton controversy, basically what happened is that this was in theaters for a week, And then they got a call from the White House. The production company and the distribution company got a call from the White House and said, take this movie out of fucking theaters right now. They said, they ordered the production company, get this movie out of theaters. It is not to be shown ever again. And it was just released last year on Blu-ray. Very much recommend that. Very much recommend it. And see, one more thing I wanted to say about the FTA show's official statement of purpose was the GI movement exists on nearly every United States military installation around the world. It is made up of American servicemen and women who have come to realize that there is to be an end to the U.S. military involvement in Southeast Asia and an end to the war. It is they who must end it. In response to the invitation of servicemen and women within the GI movement, we have formed the FTA show in order to support their fight to end discrimination against people because of race, sex, class, religion, and personal or political beliefs. And see, there was one more thing I wanted to mention about it, but I can't seem to find what it is exactly. At the end of the movie, Donald Sutherland reads a portion of Johnny Got His Gun. He actually reads a portion of Dalton Trumbo's 1938 novel Johnny Got His Gun, and it's very, very powerful, and I want to share that right now. And here again, I think it goes along with the anti-war sentiment that was, of course, with Vietnam and, of course, within Vonnegut's novel. Remember this well, you people who plan for war. Remember this, you patriots, you fierce ones, you spawners of hate, you inventors of slogans. Remember this, you have never mentioned anything else in your lives. We are men of peace. We are men who work, and we want no quarrel. But if you destroy our peace, if you take away our work, if you try to range us one against the other, we will know what to do. If you tell us to make the world safe for democracy, we will take you seriously, and by God and by Christ, we will make it so. We will use the guns you force upon us. We will use them to defend our very lives, and the menace to our lives does not lie on the other side of a no man's land that was set apart without our consent. It lies within our boundaries here and now. We have seen it, and we know it. So, like I said, absolutely recommend FTA. I mean, check it out online or pick up this Blu-ray because, that's a very, very important film of the 1970s. And I think it, goes along with the themes of Slaughterhouse-Five and what Vonnegut was writing about very much. So we're now 53 minutes into Slaughterhouse-Five. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that in the book, Billy Pilgrim becomes a optometrist, which of course goes along with the whole idea of what you can see and what you cannot see. It goes along with in terms of vision and everything. How he perceives certain things. And that, of course, was added to his character. But here again, Billy Pilgrim isn't so much a character than he is a conduit for the audience, for the readers of the book and the watchers of the movie. And I mean, that's the thing. I mean, Billy Pilgrim isn't real. I mean, he's a weak soldier. He's kind of docile. He's tall and, he's rather vanilla. And of course, that was Vonnegut's whole that was his whole intention with this character. I mean, here again, he's really just a stand-in for the author. And of course, the first part of the book, which I read earlier, and of course, the last part of the book, which is essentially an epilogue, is of course, unreliable narrator on Vonnegut's part. Yeah, I'm happy that you're here too, Katrina. Yeah, thank you everyone once again for showing up. I mean, Cliff, Dan, MLB fan 122, you guys rock. And you know, because I spent the better part of today preparing for this commentary. Because, like I said, I never read the book before, never saw the movie before, but I knew I wanted to challenge myself with this, and I think this was a perfect. We will walk with. My walk will be. The makeup in this film is really good too. I mean, I really do buy Billy Pilgrim aging here. But see, what else did I want to mention here? Let's see. The film was edited by Dee Dee Allen, who, of course, is a long time, you know, like Henry Bubstead, who was the art director, very long time distinguished film editor, you know, a film editing doctor in many cases. And her filmography is amazing. I mean, she edited The Hustler, Bonnie and Clyde for Arthur Penn, and she also later did she did a lot of Arthur Penn movies. I mean, Bonnie and Clyde, Alice's Restaurant, Little Big Man with Dustin Hoffman, Night Moves, which is a very, very underappreciated Gene Hackman movie from the 70s, a detective thriller. And she also edited Sidney Lumet's famous films Serpico and Dog Day Afternoon, which are, of course, but you know, she also later did Slapshot and The Wiz, The Breakfast Club. She edited The Breakfast Club for John Hughes, Henry and June for Philip Kaufman. John Q was one of her last films with Denzel Washington, and she also did The Addams Family. So, I mean, she did a lot of great movies from the 60s and 70s and worked with some amazing directors in editing those movies. Very distinguished editor, just like Henry Bumstead is very distinguished in terms of art direction. Okay, Schlachthof-Fünf. Schlachthof-Fünf. That, of course, is German for Slaughterhouse-Five, which, of course, is the slaughterhouse where all the German guards and the American prisoners of war were at when the bombing took place. So they were obviously shielded from all the bombs and incendiaries that American forces had dropped on the city. Now, the wife here is about to meet a pretty horrible end here. Maybe just as well. And so it goes. um, but as you can see, there's a Ronald Reagan bumper sticker on her car, which is it's referring to his first run. I believe it was for. I mean, it was while he was governor of California, but I'm trying to remember if it was for the. Well, this is set in 1968, so yeah, he was governor of California at that time. But let's see, but I thought he ran for president. Uh, I thought. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, unsuccessful attempt to force a recall election on Reagan in '68. He was reelected governor in 1970. So I thought he was. I got. I guess I'm. I thought he was. I thought he ran for president back in '68. Or it was a failed presidential bid, which is what the sticker was referring to. That's what I read, but I may be wrong on that. This, I'm coming to you, Billy. I'm coming to you. Oh, sure she is. Mm. All right, I apologize for turning silent here, but I'm waiting for us to go back to the slaughterhouse because I have a lot to say about the the German guard who orders them inside because we don't need to see any more with we don't need to see any more with Billy Pilgrim and his wife. We really don't need to see any more of her. Ugh. Follow the yellow brick road. Little was Boz reference there, obviously. Yeah, it's very yellow. I mean, this whole sequence here, there's a lot of yellow. Well, actually, I'll just go into it. But the German guard who orders everybody to yell out as an emergency the German translation of Slaughterhouse-Five, he's played by Friedrich von Lidber. Now, he's a very interesting guy because he um, he was an aristocrat. He was a Hungarian aristocrat, and he really wasn't an actor. I mean, in the 1930s, he had become very good friends with John Huston. And then in 1956, John Huston cast him in Moby Dick. He played Queequeg, the harpooner. And the 1956 version of Moby Dick is something I also absolutely recommend. See, you can see the Reagan bumper sticker there, and she finally dies. Finally. So it goes. But anyway, uh, but at any rate, so yeah, Friedrich von Lederber, played the German leader. Here he is, right here. Okay, yeah, I knew he was going to come popping up everywhere. Here again. Forgive me, I only saw this movie once before the show. I probably should have saw it a second time, but the guy who's leading the German guard that's leading all of them into the slaughterhouse is Friedrich von Lederber, and he played, of course, Queequeg in Moby Dick. And the 1956 version, produced and directed by John Huston, is without a doubt the definitive film version of Moby Dick. And I've seen the later versions with like Patrick Stewart and Christian Bale, and they just don't. I mean, the effects from the 56 movie still hold up. And what distinguishes that movie is that who played Captain Ahab, of course, was the great Gregory Peck, and he always denounced his performance. I mean, to be perfectly honest, Warner Brothers would only produce Moby Dick if they got a star to play Captain Ahab, and it ended up being Gregory Peck. But he always felt he was miscast, and he always felt he never put in 100%. But John Huston essentially acted like God on set. And in fact, Gregory Peck was nearly lost at sea. Near the end, when he's harpooning the whale, the reactions from all the other cast members, including Friedrich von Lederber, who we'll see throughout. Yeah, you just missed him right there, but yeah, there he is right here. Now he's officially on screen here. That's Friedrich right there. All the reactions of all the people in the boats, and yes, they actually filmed it on the water. Their reactions were 100% genuine. They actually thought Gregory Peck was lost at sea with the rubber whale that was produced by Dunlap. Seriously, if you haven't seen Moby Dick, Steven Spielberg, He may not never admit that that was one of the inspirations for Jaws, aside from Benchley's novel. But you look at the 1956 version of Moby Dick and you think, oh, he must have seen it. He must have seen it beforehand. Check out that version of Moby Dick. It's incredible. So we are at now 1 hour and 5 minutes into the movie. We have about 38 minutes left here. And yes, here is Holly Near, who I was talking about before. That was part of the FTA. That's him. That's her. Excuse me. That's her on screen right now. Of course, they think that. I mean, they ask. I mean, they're not really sure what their father is going through, and of course, you know, it's really just the PTSD. Now, interestingly enough, this movie and the book was written at least a decade before PTSD was ever coined. I mentioned before Best Years of Our Lives, which is my favorite movie of all time. They never used the term PTSD. However, the very famous scene of Dana Andrews in the cockpit of the plane, where he's sweating and that, you know, he obviously dropped bombs, maybe over Dresden. I mean, he might have done that as well. That's what he was experiencing. That's what he was going through. All these haunted memories of doing what he did in World War II. And PTSD wasn't coined until 1978. Before that, a lot of veterans, they were basically diagnosed as being shell-shocked, which of course came out from World War One, when they were in of course, the I'm losing it again. I apologize. I mean, there are moments where I tend to just, you know, drop everything after talking for so long because I have almost nothing else to say. But now let's see here. Has anybody out in the chat read Slaughterhouse-Five by chance? You can provide whatever you want here. I've already lost half my audience, so it's like, you know, there you go. You know, you win some, you lose some. I mean, here again, I knew that this was going to be a challenge going into it, but but yeah, here's Billy Pilgrim in the hospital here. There's some books on Dresden that are being read. I was there. That's basically Vonnegut speaking through Billy Pilgrim right there. You know, I was actually there. Now, who is? Let's see. Give me another second here. I'm sorry. Oh man. February 13th, 1945. That's when the bombing of that was literally right before the bombing of Dresden had started. You know, these war sequences in this movie, they still pack a punch. I mean, 50 years later, they're still very vivid. I mean, see, the cinematographer on this movie was Miroslav Ondřiček. He was a Czech cinematographer who worked on over 40 movies, including Oh Lucky Man and If, which are some of my favorite films with Malcolm McDowell. In fact, I mean, in case you didn't notice, but my picture usually on Twitter and thus is Malcolm McDowell from the movie If from 1968. However, he also worked on the movie version of Hair. He shot Funny Farm, which of course was George Roy Hill's last movie. He also shot Valmont, Awakenings, A League of Their Own. And his last movie was in 2001 when he shot Riding in Cars with Boys for director Penny Marshall and starring Drew Barrymore. That was his very last movie that he shot. But he shot over 40 films, with If and Oh Lucky Man being my personal favorites. I can't wait to do my commentary on Oh Lucky Man next year. It gives me a pain weeping over Dresden. What about Coventry? What about Rotterdam? What about the extermination camps of, the gassing and the maimings? Ugh. Mm. Yeah, some of these scenes are still difficult to watch after all these years. I really wish. I mean, I wanted to do this commentary almost like an English professor, but because I've read a lot of books. I majored in literature in college, but we never read any of Vonnegut's books. I mean, there's Friedrich in the back there in the German uniform. He has some dialogue, not a lot, but some. There he is, right there on the right, and the guy in the weird looking suit with the swastika on his arm there. That's what was his name? Okay, that is Howard W. Campbell Jr., and he was the protagonist of Kurt Vonnegut's earlier novel, Mother Night, that I mentioned before, which came out in Mother Night, which came out in 1962. He was the protagonist of that, and he basically played an American that moved to Germany before the war and became a Nazi propagandist. And actually, in the book, in Slaughterhouse-Five, the book, he's mentioned. I got it right here. I wanted to read this as well. While the British colonel set Lazaro's broken arm and mixed plaster for the cast, the German major translated out loud passages from Howard W. Campbell Jr.'s monograph. Campbell had been a fairly well-known playwright at one time. His opening line was this one, and this, probably more than anything in Vonnegut's book, this is what struck me as very powerful. America is the wealthiest nation on earth, but its people are mainly poor, and poor Americans are urged to hate themselves. To quote the American humorist Ken Hubbard, it ain't no disgrace to be poor, but might as well be. It is in fact a crime for an American to be poor, even though America is a nation of poor. Every other nation has folk traditions of men who were poor but extremely wise and virtuous, and therefore more estimable than anyone with power and gold. No such tales are told by the American poor. They mock themselves and glorify their betters. The meanest eating or drinking establishment owned by a man who is himself poor is very likely to have a sign on its wall asking this cruel question: if you're so smart, why ain't you rich? There will also be an American flag no larger than a child's hand glued to a lollipop stick and flying from the cash register. Americans, like human beings everywhere, believe many things that are obviously untrue, the monograph went on. Their most destructive untruth is that it is very easy for any American to make money. They will not acknowledge how, in fact, hard money is to come by, and therefore those who have no money blame and blame and blame themselves. This inward blame has been a treasure for the rich and powerful who have had to do less for their poor publicly and privately than any other ruling class since, say, Napoleonic times. Howard W. Campbell Jr. now discussed the uniform of the American enlisted in the Second World War. Every other army in history, preposterous or not, has attempted to clothe even its lowliest soldiers so as to make them impressive to themselves and others as stylish experts in drinking and copulation and looting and sudden death. The American Army, however, sends its enlisted men out to fight and die in a modified business suit, quite evidently made from another man, a sterilized but unpressed gift from a nose-holding charity which passes out clothing to drunks in the slums. When a dashingly clad officer addresses such a frumpishly dressed bum, he scolds him as an officer in an army must. But the officer's contempt is not, as in other armies, avuncular theatricality. It is a genuine expression of hatred for the poor who have no one to blame for their misery but themselves. A prison administrator dealing with captured American enlisted men for the first time should be warned. Expect no brotherly love, even between brothers. There will be no cohesion between the individuals. Each will be a sulky child who often wishes he were dead. And so it goes. Okay, timestamp here. We are at 1 hour and 16 minutes. 1 hour and 16 minutes, and we have approximately 28 minutes to go. Aw. Again, for the life of me, I don't remember if Spot was actually in the book. I don't recall. Something tells me he wasn't, though. I don't remember the dog being in there, but I could be wrong. And like I said, that was his daughter, played by Holly Near, who I talked about in length before. That of course is Frederick von Lieber, who I was talking about before. Excuse me, I keep on mangling his name. Friedrich von Lederber. Yeah, Friedrich von Lederber. And of course, they're lighting the candles. They're deep down in the slaughterhouse as the bombings are about to start in Dresden, devastating the city. Like I said, this is certainly not a straightforward book on Vonnegut's part. I mean, he wanted to write something about the bombings of Dresden, but he does so with science fiction elements. But I'm wondering, because one of my interpretations of the book was, here again, other characters are saying that, oh, you blacked out, you were passed out, whatnot. Is it possible that because of all the shock treatment that he receives in the hospital, could this all be taking place in his mind while he's suffering in a veteran's hospital bed? Because in the book, Vonnegut does state that Billy Pilgrim goes to several hospitals because of his PTSD. And of course, he gets treatment. I mean, it actually happens even before he marries his wife, and everything. So I'm wondering if this is just all in Billy Pilgrim's head, and all the alien stuff and everything. And because he saw, like I said, he saw Valerie's character in the Playboy. Valerie's character is, by the way, Montana Wildhack. I love that name. Absolutely love that name. That this could all be in his head. It could all be a fantasy, you could say, and that he's not really time traveling. But I mean, I've read my fair share of articles saying that there are scientists that say that time travel is possible, but we as a species will never be able to accomplish that, or not. Who knows? But here again, I stand by my philosophy, which has always been that movies are really the only way that we could actually time travel. I mean, movies are really the only route to go. I mean, you could watch a movie like Braveheart and be transported back to 12th century England, or you could watch something like Dangerous Beauty and go back to 16th century Italy, or I mean, the many other World War II movies out there. I mean, the point is, when you feel like you're actually transported back in time, that to me is a worthwhile film experience. And maybe not every performance hits the target. Maybe there's other technical issues that keep it from being a great film. But man, if you can make the audience feel like they traveled back to a specific time and place, as far as I'm concerned, you pretty much won them over. Oh yeah, this soldier, he goes back into to try to rescue his mother, and he's being pulled out by the Germans here. Now here's Perry King in his Green Beret uniform. And Billy Pilgrim, of course, being Vonnegut in spirit, obviously doesn't. While he's proud of his son, he's not really happy about him going off to Vietnam. Now, amazingly enough, later on in the movie, because like I said, we only have about 22 minutes left here. Billy Pilgrim says that he was born on the 4th of July. Now, of course, in 1989, we had the Oliver Stone movie, Born on the 4th of July, with Tom Cruise as Ron Kovic, who was a Vietnam veteran that came home paralyzed from the waist down. And as far as I'm concerned, that's Tom Cruise's greatest performance. But the interesting thing, and the reason why that movie is so powerful, is because Oliver Stone did something that Congress will never do, which is in many ways, Born on the 4th of July was an apology to Vietnam for what we did to them. After murdering millions of of the citizens while we were there. I mean, that was basically Oliver Stone's way of apologizing to the Vietnamese for what we had done. And like I said, I mean, as the 1974 Academy Award winning documentary Hearts and Minds argued, that we were, in fact, the very wrong side of that war. I don't care what conservatives say. I don't care what the military says. I don't care what the government says. The Vietnam War was a huge, massive faux pas on the part of the American government. And we lost so many lives so needlessly. Here again, all based upon a lie, because the Gulf of Tonkin incident never happened. It never happened. And yes, the Secretary of Defense, Robert S. McNamara, at the time, later confessed to that and said, yeah, it never happened. So the government lied about taking us into war. And I can imagine that for the next century, it'll keep on going and going and going. The government will start wars that are unjustified and send our boys and girls out there to die needlessly, just so the military-industrial complex could get rich. That's basically it. Much of this final act of the movie of Slaughterhouse-Five takes place on this planet, of course. I keep forgetting the name of the planet, even though I should have it memorized by now. Tralfamadore. Yeah, Tralfamadore, where the flying saucers come from. Oh, wonderful. Speaking of Malcolm McDowell, I'll be watching him in The Caller next week. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, Malcolm McDowell is one of my all-time favorite actors. I'll watch him in anything. A huge fan of Slaughterhouse-Five was actually Anthony Burgess, who also wrote Clockwork Orange. Using the Tralfamadorian passivity of fate, Billy Pilgrim learns to overlook death and the shock involved with death. Pilgrim claims the Tralfamadorian philosophy on death to be his most important lesson. The most important thing I learned on Tralfamadore was that when a person dies, he only appears to die. He is still very much alive in the past. So it is very silly for people to cry at his funeral. I actually kind of agree with that. All moments, past, present, and future, always have existed, always will exist. When a Tralfamadorian sees a corpse, all he thinks is that the dead person is in bad condition in that particular moment, but that the same person is just fine in plenty of other moments. Now, when I myself hear that somebody's dead, I simply shrug and say what the Tralfamadorians say about dead people, which is, so it goes. But here again, in the movie, those words are never uttered. They are never, ever uttered by any character or anybody in the book, in the movie. Nowhere. There was actually another author, I forget his name, but he had planned to write a book about the Dresden bombings. And then Slaughterhouse-Five came out and was like, well, Vonnegut did it better than I could ever do it. Any looting or stealing will be dealt with by a firing squad. Yeah. Yeah, it's so sad because the character of Edgar Derby, who I mentioned at the beginning, of course, he is going to die just for, finding a teapot. Mm. Okay, we are approximately 1 hour, 26 minutes, 30 seconds in, and we have 17 minutes left to go in Slaughterhouse-Five. Again, forgive me. I mean, I wish this commentary was a bit more literate, and I wish that it was, went much deeper into the themes. But here again, I read the book and I saw the movie for the very first time today, and in many ways, I wanted this to be a very first impression type of commentary. Now, weirdly enough, when I saw this earlier in the day, this climax where they burn all these bodies, it actually made me think of Night of the Living Dead, which of course came out in 1968. And George Romero, of course, was, aside from being inspired by movies like Carnival of Souls and The Last Man on Earth, written by Richard Matheson, he also drew upon the horrors of Vietnam and specifically, our own history with racism in the United States. Um, Pretty amazing that movie came out the same year as Martin Luther King and Kennedy being shot. And at the end of the movie, the black protagonist gets shot in the head when they mistake when they actually think he's a zombie. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk more about the here again. I said it before, the very exquisite, very gorgeous, and very talented Valerie Perrine, who just basically shows up out of nowhere. the Tralfamadorians took her and brought her to the planet so that she can mate with Billy Pilgrim here. And like I said, Valerie, I grew up watching the Superman films, Superman 1 and 2, and obviously fell in love with her like many others did when she played Eve Teschmacher, the mall to Gene Hackman's character Lex Luthor. And slowly but surely over time, I started watching her other movies. But it should be noted that she was also the first actress to appear nude on American television in 1973 on PBS. And not a lot of stations broadcast that steam bath television show. But in 1974, Bob Fosse, the director of Cabaret, cast her as Honey Harlow in the movie Lenny, where Lenny played Dustin Hoffman, and Valerie Perrine. If I said Perrine before, I apologize. Okay, just real quick. Back when I actually had a copy of the television version of Superman, the television announcer always mispronounced her last name as Perrine. No, actually, it's Valerie Perrine. But Valerie, she was in Lenny as stripper Honey Bruce, wife of Lenny Bruce. And she was actually nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress. And she also won Best Actress at the Cannes Film Festival. So she basically became very in demand after Lenny. Although, like I said, George Roy Hill cast her first in Slaughterhouse-Five as, here again, I love that name, Montana Wildhack. And but she was also in movies like W.C. Fields and Me, The Electric Horseman, Can't Stop the Music, which I actually have a Blu-ray copy of. I can't dig it out right now. And she had done other films after that, but what she is mainly known for is Honey Bruce in Lenny and Eve Teschmacher in the Superman films. And just to let everybody know that there was a documentary made very recently about Valerie and her film career and her struggles with Parkinson's disease. In the description below this commentary, there is a link to that documentary. I highly recommend everybody watch it. And it's very sad because she's been struggling with Parkinson's for several years now, and it's pretty sad. But thankfully, she's still with us, and it's great to see her. It's great to see her talk on that documentary. It really is. And and of course, she's very, very active on Twitter, and said that when she saw my, she retweeted my commentary tweet and said that she loved George Roy Hill and was very, very grateful that he cast her in her first movie here in Slaughterhouse-Five. And I like how Billy Pilgrim is being very much a gentleman in the sequence. And of course, she says that in the entertainment industry, there's not a lot of gentlemen. Yeah, that could be argued. Absolutely. But yeah, she's irresistible. I think she's irresistible in every movie I've seen her in. Not just gorgeous, but just absolutely talented and irresistible as a performer as well. And she's here again. Her character Montana Wildhack isn't in the book much, and of course in the movie she maybe has 15-20 minutes of screen time at best, but she definitely makes a massive impression in her first film. Definitely a massive impression. Yeah, I like the speaker of the Tralfamadorians, who is helping her understand where she is and everything. Here is like, are you mating now? They don't say a word. You know what? We're just not even to say. We're just not even going to say if we're doing anything or not. I like how it keeps it everything in the dark there. No pun intended. Now, of course, we're back in Dresden, and this is the point where, of course, yeah, this is the point where Edgar Derby ends up getting shot by the Germans for finding this little this little trinket. Ah, man. Yeah, this is pretty hard to watch right here. So, he's trying to explain to him, and then they just shoot him. Just shoot him dead. Ugh. Mm. And then, of course, we go back to the dome, and yeah. Okay, like I said, we have 8 minutes left, so we're pretty much near the end of the movie. Um, I want to see that Perrine doc. So do I. Yeah, like I said, look in the description underneath the commentary on this YouTube channel, and you will see it right here on the page, right below me. Just look in the description. But yeah, very much worth watching. Absolutely worth watching because yeah, in my opinion, I think Valerie's a national treasure. I really do. I mean, she's here again. I mean, um, somebody smacked her in the rear of a car and the exhaust fell off. Died of carbon monoxide. Mm. So yeah, his wife died of carbon monoxide, and in this dome where they're at, like light years away from the planet Earth, the atmosphere is actually cyanide. So if they actually left the dome, and here again, the aliens are basically keeping them as like zoo specimens. Um, and they have no opinion on death. I mean, it doesn't really matter to them at all. I mean, because they think, well, you live in the present, you live in the past, and you were alive, and you are still alive to in the sense that, well, people will remember you, and you lived and everything, and there it goes. Or so it goes, rather. There's no such planet as Trifelimaduke or whatever it is. Seriously, there were points I read in the book where I was like, "Is this a comedy?" Because I mean, the amount of humor that Vonnegut dumps into the book is pretty. Despite one of the most horrible episodes of World War II, and it should be noted that Vonnegut also was in the Battle of the Bulge, like Billy Pilgrim, and that was a significant turning point in the war, obviously, because the Germans, they used a lot of artillery, they used a lot of resources just to win the Battle of the Bulge, and ironically enough, they lost World War II basically because all their resources had been depleted during the Battle of the Bulge. And one more thing I forgot to mention that I really wanted to about Friedrich von Liedeber is that he was enlisted in the Austro-Hungarian Imperial Army in 1916 and was an officer in the Austrian Cavalry Division during the last years of World War One. Mm-hmm. All the way to death. I've seen it many times. Absolutely. And so it goes. Life has no beginning, no middle, no end. And like I said, this ending to the movie is pretty much the ending to the book as well, where um, revenge has finally come to pass when Paul Lazaro, played by Ron Leibman, ends up murdering Billy Pilgrim here. If you protest, if you think that death is a terrible thing, then you have not understood what I have said. You see, it's time to go home to your wives and children. It's time for me to be dead for a little while. and then live again. I give you the Tralfamadorian greeting. Hello, farewell. That doesn't look like Ron Leibman underneath that makeup, but I'm sure it's probably him. And here again, I was actually very impressed with the makeup in this movie. But then again, I don't see Rob Leibman underneath there. I see Michael Sachs, but I don't see Ron Leibman. And that's well, nobody fucks around with with Paul Lazaro. But here again, Billy Pilgrim able to do his time travel thing. We are, back in Dresden. What did the Germans say? No stealing, no looting, none of that stuff. Let's get the fuck out of here. At least Billy Pilgrim with this giant grandfather clock. Oh man. Mm. And these are the Russians who give them some vodka, and yeah, it's kind of ironic, watching this movie now. I mean, in World War II, the Russians were part of the Allied forces to help defeat the Germans, and now they're the ones. The Russians are now the ones committing war crimes against Ukraine. I just love Valerie's chirping nature. I mean, here again, she's just irresistible. I mean, a wonderful screen presence, and here again, I mean, you have to check out Lenny. If you haven't checked out Lenny, directed by Bob Fosse, that is essential cinema, and I will be doing a commentary on that in a couple of years, which I'm really looking forward to. And of course, the music swells up in celebration of them mating and having a baby. I mean, that's the way this that's the way this movie ends. Which here again, sadly, Slaughterhouse-Five, directed by George Roy Hill, it was not a hit in 1972. In fact, it made hardly any money. But as an adaptation of Kurt Vonnegut's novel, it's actually quite excellent. I think. I mean, it's faithful. It even though we never hear the term "and so it goes," even though we never hear those words from any of the characters, it's still an excellent translation of the novel in terms of the characters and the themes and the humor, most definitely. And here we have our cast and everything. Henry Bumstead is Elliot Rosewater. Like I said, he was not an actor; he was an art director and a production designer. And that is the end of Slaughterhouse-Five. Yeah, I must confess that this was a fascinating. Thank you so much, Cliff. I really do appreciate it. Great job tonight. See you next time. Yeah. I mean, I had my moments where I, just lost my train of thought or train of conversation and discussion and everything. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I highly recommend Slaughterhouse-Five to anybody. I mean, it's on Amazon Prime. And like I said in the description, one last time in the description, please be sure to check out the documentary on Valerie Perrine. And it also includes Perrine. I hate myself. Valerie Perrine, excuse me. Okay. But there's also a link down there where you can donate to help fight her Parkinson's disease. Please be sure to check out her documentary and make a donation if you're willing to. But here again, an exquisite lady who I've always loved her in films, and I'm finally glad I saw her film debut tonight in Slaughterhouse-Five. Yes, indeed. Nice job. My kid watched it too and really enjoyed it. Cheers. Thank you, Rob. Really appreciate it. Cliff, Rob, Katrina, Emily, fan 122, and Daniel Shine was in here earlier, and Dying Breed was in here earlier. You guys are awesome. Thank you very much for showing up, and I'll be sure to do some editing on this commentary after I'm done here. But anyway, next week at 9 p.m. Eastern Time will be my next 50th anniversary audio commentary for John Waters' Pink Flamingos, which had its world premiere in Baltimore, Maryland on March 17th, 1972. And it is now officially inducted into the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. So that will be next Saturday at 9 p.m. Pink Flamingos, directed by John Waters. Yes. Looking forward to watching both films, and thanks for the great commentary tonight. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you. No, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming out and supporting me. I mean, I don't like to say it often, but leave a thumbs up, leave a comment if you want to. And here again, I will see you all next Saturday night. Take care, everybody.